Okay, we're going to present our work in relation to the project MA08, representing archives for machine learning. And Pat is leading the thing, then there is me, and then the company here is at least Jim and Corinne in this group, Peter, and we have to check a little bit our records, who others might be kind of involved in this work, and then of course kind of everybody or anyone who will be involved at a later stage. What we have been doing, so the initial thought for the project that was kind of sold to the project was to inquire into to how to make archives more available to AI and ML research, practice, communities, and to make the interactions between archives and the AI context more kind of smoother. And the idea was that archives were awash of in descriptive metadata, and there should be a way to leverage that metadata to help researchers and practitioners in the AI field to understand the appropriateness of the given archive for particular machine learning approach or methodology. And we have been kind of working on this for quite a while, mostly because of other things going on. So we haven't been kind of really been able to focus on this too much. So that's why it has taken time. We started with an idea that we would be doing interviews and or focus groups with both archives people and machine learning people, but then we sort of kind of for many practical reasons and also reasons related to kind of really saying something meaningful about the topic. So we kind of shifted to looking to a selection of archival standards, and we picked for our analysis that we have done so far IZG, RIC, DAX, RAND, EAD, and algorithms, and looked how they allowed the documentation information that machine learning community members would need to know about datasets in their work. And this kind of what the ML community members would need to know about datasets in their work. So it was operationalized as the so-called Sullivan's list of descriptors. Kind of going back to that a little bit later. And then we had some preliminary research questions, kind of sort of, or questions that are guiding the whole thing. And we're interested then in that whether the schema we're looking at, so whether it addressed the font level and or record set level or item or record or both level, the kind of the what's going on. Then we're interested in the fields that contain elements which could be used to select appropriate ML methods, tools to process or analyze the archival material. Then when it comes to specific schemes, so when there's a problem of clarity and scope of the given concept, field, element, whatever, so what should or should not be included and what level of detail and how in order to make the documentation, the metadata relevant for ML purposes. Then we're also interested is the metadata encoded in such way as to be useful for ML purposes. That's kind of on the basis of the standard and what the standard stipulates, rather than kind of how the standards is actually going to be operationalized. This could be, of course, kind of something that could be looked into in future studies, but yeah, that's a little bit out of scope of what we are focusing on right now. And then one more question is whether the values in the field are at the level of specificity, format, and so on, that could be helpful to ML in understanding the data, and then how and to what extent it could be actionable by a machine learning community. And we looked at a selection of archival standards, the ones mentioned just a moment ago. And we were kind of trying to pick up a selection of major archival record standards, and that are currently relevant kind of at the moment, or that they would be relevant through their legacy somehow, that they are kind of sort of influencing how archival description is done at the moment. And then that also that they will be sufficiently different from each other so that it's not kind of really that one of the standards would be basically kind of sort of an operationalization of the other one. Then the so-called Sullivan's list of what ML community would need description-wise. that was compiled by Peter, and we have to figure out a kind of a more, let's say, serious name for the thing, but we're kind of in the middle of the process of figuring out something. And it was based on more or less on two articles that look into what natural language processing and then kind of in the other one is about datasets for datasets. So kind of what different qualities and what types of information would be required of datasets and the dataset related metadata to be relevant for ML. The analysis we have been done so far, so it's a huge spreadsheet, and we have done a walkthrough of each standard and compared it to Sullivan's list. I've been doing kind of one sweep of that, and then there's still a little bit work to kind of clean it a little bit, and then it has to be verified, of course. And there's plenty of people who are even more well versed in the standards than I am, so it will be quite helpful and needs to be done before we're going to finalize any kind of reporting. But some preliminary conclusions, observations can be kind of stated on the basis of what we have been doing so far, and it's quite clear that all of schemas contain fields and stipulations that cover much of the information on the Sullivan's list. There's of course some kind of variation, but quite a lot of that information could be documented if the standards would be followed. Then the other question is that much of that information can be encoded, but it's not always quite likely that it will be there, considering what the purposes of the schemas are for kind of archival description rather than description for machine learning. Then it's quite apparent that kind of information might be there, but it might not be adequate or compatible when it comes to level of detail and specifics. One example could be that language could be documented in the archive according to different archival description standards as Arabic, whereas a machine learning professional practitioner would be interested in much more detailed understanding of what kind of Arabic it's all about. And then we can say that kind of on a more theoretical level, so differences between epistemic cultures, communities of practice, and or other theorizations of kind of how different understandings are kind of sort of clustered. So it makes it difficult to use the metadata across domains, and that's kind of the domain, the archival domain, and then the AI and ML domain. But kind of with little planning and work, some information could definitely be made available. And I guess that when we look a little bit closer into the crosswalk, so we can there will be many more examples and much more detail on kind of where the differences are, what things probably are pretty much kind of useful across the domains. Then there are many caveats. The problem of the degree of equivalency of the concepts across and between schemas, and then of course kind of between the domains. So there is quite a lot of variation. Each of the schemas serve different functions, and they have kind of arise from different backgrounds and operational contexts. So even if the information would be the same, so it's not necessarily the same in the end. And then there is the question of the kind of the balance between the epistemic approach from which the schema comes from, and then how it was codified in the schema and how the schema is being applied. So there are of course differences there. And then when it comes to application, so to what extent the standards are being followed is a big question, and there's a lot of research on following standards and inconsistencies and incompleteness of standardized descriptions. So that's something that's definitely kind of going to affect quite a lot what is actually there. Then the heterogeneous of the data archive record set being considered has definitely implications to what information would kind of really end up being there. How the metadata is structured according to many standards. So So there's a lot of more or less kind of open-ended descriptions of different things, whereas the ML, the Sullivan's list is asking for very specific details. And then we can kind of speculate, of course, that maybe kind of bigger archives and more kind of that when there are workflows in place and stuff like that, so it might lead to more kind of structured descriptions, whereas when it comes to more kind of ephemeral data, so and data sets, so then there might be more variation. And then future work, we have to verify the coding, then writing the narrative of the analysis, and we just discussed about that. We are probably going to go to a journal article, and maybe if there will be a kind of a conference way to present, so we could do that as well. Probably it would be relevant to go somewhere that's kind of sort of archives and somehow machine learning relevant, somewhere between the two. This isn't kind of awfully interesting for kind of a hardcore archives people or hardcore ML people, I guess, but for those who are working in the interface. And there's the Interparty's favorite journal, the Journal of Computing and Cultural Heritage, could be, of course, kind of something that we could think about. Maybe going to digital humanities, something might also be a relevant context where there are both archives persons and machine learning enthusiasts. And yeah, do you have anything to add, Pat?
The only thing to add really was the intent was to produce something that was practical, to be able to help archives sort of situate themselves and have an initial conversation with ML folks about what was in a collection and how that sorry, Luciana, not collection, in an archive, in a record set, and whether it was structured sufficiently or in a machine comprehensible way to be able to be processed.